My video on Batman Nightfall is taking a while because, it's a massive story. So while I work on that, we figured we'd split up and release an older video that we never ended up putting out. With his recent appearance in Stride of Pride on the She-Hulk show, as well as his upcoming series on Disney+, now is a great time to look at one of the Man Without Fear's most iconic stories. I'm Andrew Boyd, and today on Top 10 Nerd, I will be attempting to explain the plot of Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Daredevil Born Again. But first, a little background. Take it away, past Andrew. When Frank Miller started working at Marvel in the late 70s, Daredevil was not a popular book, and Miller was working mostly as a cover artist and a fill-in artist. When he was working on an issue of the Spectacular Spider-Man that guest-starred Daredevil, Miller saw the potential in the character and campaigned to be moved to the Man Without Fear's book. He became the regular artist on Daredevil number 158, working with writer Roger McKenzie. Miller disliked McKenzie's scripts so much that he almost quit the series, but when new Marvel editor Denny O'Neil arrived, he was impressed by a backup story Miller had written and made Miller the penciler and the writer on the book. Miller's stories proved so popular that after only 3 issues, Daredevil was taken from a bi-monthly title to a monthly title. He stayed on the title until issue 191, having essentially reinvented and reinvigorated the character. Miller was shot to fame, for a comic book creator, and went on to create classic works such as The Dark Knight Returns. Miller was asked back to the Daredevil title in 1986 as a writer. He agreed on the condition that the artist, David Mazzucchelli, would be working from his complete scripts, rather than using the infamous Marvel method, which focused more on artists using a vague outline to draw a story and the writer filling in the dialogue after. Miller and Mazzucchelli would go on to create Batman Year One together the very next year, but not before crafting one of Daredevil's most beloved stories. Let's dive in. A few important story threads are actually set up in the issue immediately before the Born Again arc in Daredevil number 226, so we'll very briefly go over just the important stuff from there. Matt Murdock's mental health is beginning to take a turn for the worse, with him isolating and constantly ruminating about how unfair his life is. His firm, Nelson & Murdock, is closing, and his relationship with his girlfriend, Glory O'Brien, is on the rocks. Glory has been confiding in Matt's partner, Foggy, about her concerns, and both are surprised to realize that they have a lot of chemistry. Glory starts crying because this was a book written by a man in the 80s, and apologizes for, quote, going on like a little girl. Foggy reassures her, saying that it's okay as he, quote, likes little girls. Well, no, that can't be right. I like little girls. Well, I'm sure he just means that. You know what, let's move on to the main story. Born Again begins in Mexico with Karen Page. Karen is Matt Murdock's ex-girlfriend who moved to California to become an actress. She developed a serious substance abuse issue and became an actress in adult films to support her addiction. She has become a junkie in serious need of a fix, and in order to get it, she offers her pusher an envelope containing Daredevil's true identity in exchange for the smack. The envelope gets passed up the criminal food chain until it ends up in the hands of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin. Excited by the prospect of ruining his nemesis's life, Fisk tells his assistant Wesley to prepare to have anyone who has come into contact with the envelope killed once he verifies the information within. In New York, Matt gets possibly the worst mail dump in history as he gets a letter from the bank saying that his last 2 mortgage payments have not been received, a letter from the IRS saying that his accounts are frozen as he is being audited, and a cassette tape with a message from Glory informing him that she is breaking up with him. Just when it seems things can't get much worse, there's a knock at the door, and Matt is served with a subpoena telling him to appear before a grand jury as a respected police officer is claiming he saw Matt bribe a witness. Across town, Glory's apartment has been broken into. She can't call Matt as she just dumped him, so she calls Foggy for support. Afraid to stay in her apartment, Glory asks Foggy if she can stay with him for a bit. They chat by the fire at Foggy's place as things continue to get toasty between the two of them. Daredevil goes after the cop who accused him of bribery, Nick Manolis. He breaks into his apartment and confronts Nick, but doesn't get any information. He leaves, but continues to spy on Nick, overhearing him make a phone call to persons unknown, confirming that Daredevil showed up. He says he will continue to lie about Murdock in exchange for help with his 6 sons' medical expenses. Daredevil has his confirmation that someone is trying to frame him, but by going after Nick, he has inadvertently confirmed Kingpin's suspicions about the Man Without Fear's secret identity. Back at Foggy's, Foggy wakes up on his couch to the sight and smells of Glory making breakfast. The phone rings and Glory picks up. It is Matt, who is understandably confused as to why his ex is answering his best friend's phone. He talks to Foggy about all of his recent troubles, minus the Daredevil related activities, as Foggy is not aware of his friend's alter ego at this point in continuity. Foggy and Matt begin working together on a defense case for his upcoming indictment. Meanwhile, Kingpin's network of spies relays all the information about Matt's life falling apart, as Fisk squirms in delight at his enemy's predicament. His suspicions confirmed, he gives the order to have anyone who came into contact with the envelope killed, so that he can be the only one privy to Daredevil's secret. Despite a fantastic defense by Foggy, Fisk's frame job works and Matt is disbarred and can no longer practice law. Impressed with Foggy, Kingpin makes a note to hire him as one of his own attorneys. Back in Mexico, Karen returns to the Pusher for another fix and witnesses him being killed by a hired assassin. The killer goes after Karen, who runs off into the night. At the same time, Matt is walking home to his apartment as his thoughts become more and more paranoid, suspecting that anyone, including Foggy, might be involved in the frame. Just as he is about to get home, his apartment blows up. Matt sifts through the ruins of his home, but all he finds is his Daredevil suit. This makes him realize that this is a message from his enemy, and as the issue ends, he remarks that the frame job was a nice piece of work, but Kingpin shouldn't have signed it. Part 2, Issue 228. Purgatory. Foggy and Glory are busy playing house when Matt calls, sounding paranoid and borderline delusional. Glory starts crying again, and Foggy gets on the line, but Matt has hung up. Matt is curled up in the fetal position in a seedy, cheap motel as his mind continues to spiral. The IRS has frozen his bank accounts and his credit cards, leaving Matt with only $10 to survive on. He thinks about how far Kingpin has caused him to fall and contemplates killing his enemy. As the Kingpin looks over the city from his penthouse, delighting in his enemy's torture, Matt dreams of beating Fisk and forcing him to fix his broken life. Matt wakes up and continues calling Foggy and Glory, accusing them of being complicit in his downfall and telling Foggy, "I'm on to you, Nelson." Matt hears footsteps in the hall. It's simply the hotel manager coming to inform Matt that it's time to check out, but in his paranoid state, Matt thinks he's one of Kingpin's men and attacks him before leaving to go and confront Fisk. Fisk is in the gym, you know, pumping iron in his little purple Speedo, as the PI hired to follow Matt describes an incident on the subway where 3 armed youths entered the subway car and robbed the passengers. Matt seemed indifferent to the situation until the robbers came to him, and he brutally attacked the robbers, breaking several of their bones in the process. A cop comes on board and Matt attacks him too, stealing the officer's billy club. Kingpin is overjoyed, telling the PI that he is lucky to have witnessed the death of a noble man. Matt is at a payphone talking to Foggy about his deteriorating mental state and how he is planning on going after Fisk, but we soon realize that he is actually talking to himself in a state of delusion. Back in Mexico, Karen tries to call Matt but learns that his line has been disconnected. She realizes that the men chasing her must be trying to kill her to tie up loose ends, and decides she must get back to New York to ask Matt for help. At the Daily Bugle, Daredevil's friend and reporter Ben Urich is trying to convince J. Jonah Jameson to let him look into Matt's case. Ben knows Matt's secret, and knows that he would never engage in bribery, and suspects that the Kingpin must be involved. Matt goes to Fisk Tower and is let in by the secretary, who tells him he is expected. He is led to Kingpin's gym where the two fight. Kingpin trounces Matt and has him put in the back of a stolen taxicab. He has the driver of the cab killed with the billy club and has the doors rusted shut before having the cab pushed into the East River. Fisk spends the next few days in ecstasy, but his mood sours when the police find the cab and the driver, but no sign of Matt. Part 3, Issue 229, Pariah. It's Christmas time, and Matt is celebrating the holiday by curling up in an alley in the fetal position, thinking about the accident that robbed him of his sight but gave him his heightened senses. He remembers a woman with a gold crucifix around her neck, who comforted him in the hospital and told him to think of his new senses as a blessing. He wonders who could have cared about him and comforted him so much and then disappeared from his life, never to be heard from again. In Midtown, Foggy and Glory are doing their Christmas shopping when a purse snatcher does his thing. Glory tries to fight him off, but when the thief pulls a knife, Foggy uses a bowling ball he had bought for a friend to hit him over the head. Glory laments how horrible a city New York is, where such a thing could happen, and none of the other passerby would help or even care. Oh, Frank Miller, you're just full of the holiday spirit, aren't you? Ben Urich goes to the hospital to try and talk to Officer Nick Manolis about Matt's situation. Nick's son is having cardiac troubles and is about to undergo surgery. Ben pieces together together that Nick must have lied about Matt in order to get his son the medical attention he needs. In Mexico, Karen is spending her Christmas trying to rob a blind beggar. You know, I think there's actually a Bing Crosby song about that. When the beggar catches her and starts screaming, Karen knocks him out, takes his money, and moves on. But the hired killers aren't far behind. Matt wanders the streets until he comes across Turk Barrett and one of his associates who have been knocking out charity Santa Clauses and stealing their costumes so they can go to rich areas and collect donations for themselves. Matt tries to stop them, but he is weak with pneumonia, and Turk stabs him in the gut without much trouble and takes off. Back at the hospital, Nick's son has died on the operating table. As helping his child was the only reason Nick agreed to work for the Kingpin, he begins to tell Ben about the frame job. The two go to the parking garage to have a smoke and keep talking. Karen has dinner with another pusher named Paulo, who offers to keep her addiction fed and take her to America in exchange for her company. The hitmen show up, but Paulo's packing a shoddy and takes them out before fleeing with Karen, telling her that she better be worth it. It seems like the only people having a remotely decent Christmas are Foggy and Glory, who despite their run-in with the purse snatcher are enjoying each other's company. Foggy gives her a very expensive necklace, and the two start smooching up a storm. In the hospital parking garage, Nick and Ben are talking when one of the nurses comes out and attacks them. She tells Ben that from now on, anytime he says the name Matt Murdock, he will lose the use of his fingers. She drives the point home by breaking all 5 of his right-hand fingers and brutally beating Nick, putting him in traction. Matt breaks into Fogwell's boxing gym and starts taking his frustrations out on a bag. Due to sickness and blood loss, he passes out, but a nun comes in and finds him and says his name. She is the same woman who comforted him as a child. Kingpin is in the gym training and obsessing over the fact that Matt got away and is out there somewhere and might one day come for him. The words "no corpse" rattle around in his head as he pushes himself to his physical limits to try and take his mind off Murdock. He always thought of Daredevil as more of a nuisance than an actual threat, but he realizes that Matt is more dangerous to him than he ever realized, and that by taking so much away from Matt, he has accidentally taught him that a man without hope is a man without fear. Part 4, Issue 230, Born Again. Matt is being taken care of by the nun, Sister Maggie, in the mission. His heart stops and he dies for a moment, but due to Maggie's efforts, comes back to life. We see him lying in bed, this time in a Christ-like position, symbolizing both the literal and metaphorical death and resurrection he has gone through in the last 3 issues. Karen is in America with Paulo, making her way to New York, where she is sure that Matt will save her. She makes it to New York, but Paulo decides that he will not let her leave him. Fisk continues to train, sparring 6 black belts at once and obsessing about the fact that Matt Murdock is alive. He beats the 6 black belts and in his paranoia tells Wesley to locate a man named Nuke. Wesley objects, saying that no one has ever used Nuke for a domestic job, but Fisk makes it clear that this is not up for debate. Meanwhile, Foggy has just taken a high-paying job as a lawyer. He doesn't know that he's working for Fisk, but something does seem slightly off to him. Him and Glory talk and worry about Matt as neither of them have seen him for almost 2 weeks. Ben has been sufficiently scared by his encounter in the parking garage and decides to drop the story. Jameson and Ben have a meeting, and JJ tells Ben he knows that something has happened and tries to convince him to get back on the journalistic horse. You know, it's funny, when JJ shows up in a Spider-Man story, he comes off as a buffoonish jerk, but when he's in Daredevil stories, he often comes across more like a character from Spotlight. When Ben refuses to even make eye contact with Jonah, JJ kicks Ben out of his office in disgust. Once outside the office, a super shady janitor reveals to Ben that Kingpin is having him watched, and that he better keep his mouth shut. Things get even worse when Nick phones Ben from his hospital bed and tells him he wants to go on the record about Kingpin. Ben pretends not to know what he's talking about, but the nurse comes into Nick's room and makes Ben listen as she strangles Nick to death. Matt continues to try and recover with the help of Maggie, and he realizes that she's the same woman who helped him as a child. Maggie prays for Matt's survival, telling God that Matt should not be punished for her sins, and that if he lives, she knows he will bring light to this poisoned city. Karen manages to get away from Paulo for a bit, and gets a hold of Foggy and convinces him to meet her for lunch. She doesn't reveal Matt's secret, but she tells Foggy what has happened to her, and that only Matt can help her. Foggy fills her in on what has happened with Matt, and convinces her to stay with him rather than letting her go back to Paulo. Ben has spent the last few days in fear, but as he thinks about everything that he's witnessed, his resolve strengthens, and he finally allows himself to speak the words, Matt Murdock. Kingpin has to wait 3 days before he he can hire Nuke, and decides to use that time to draw Matt out of hiding, and makes a call to find a suitable lunatic, and has his men threaten Melvin Potter into making a duplicate of Daredevil's costume for the lunatic to wear. Matt's fever break and he is on the mend. He asks Sister Maggie if she is his mother and she says no, but Matt hears her heartbeat and realizes she's lying. We're only halfway through the story and we're already out of time. I've already filmed part 2, so keep an eye out for the video detailing the rest of this story coming soon. I'm also working on the promised Batman Nightfall video, which is a massive story that will likely also end up being split into multiple parts. So to make sure you don't miss any of them, remember to subscribe to Top 10 Nerd, and if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like it and let us know in the comments below.